Olá para você que acompanha o canal Agro Mais, o meu nome é Gabriel Estrela e este aqui é o Agro América, um programa produzido em parceria com o Instituto Interamericano de Cooperação para a Agricultura, o ICA. Aqui falamos de boas práticas agrícolas que podem ser reproduzidas nos 34 Estados-membros do continente americano em prol a uma agricultura mais sustentável e o bem-estar rural. Hoje o assunto é tecnologia, ciência para a mitigação dos impactos das mudanças do clima, entre outros assuntos que impactam a agricultura para os pequenos e os grandes produtores. Convidei a diretora do CGIAR, que é a sigla em inglês que significa Grupo Consultivo em Pesquisa Agrícola Internacional. É apenas a maior rede de pesquisa focada em agricultura publicamente financiada do mundo. A minha entrevistada é a diretora do órgão, a doutora Ismahane Elouafi. Dr. Elouafi, welcome to Agro América. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, and a pleasure to be with you today.
Well, let's start already because there's a lot to talk about. According to FAO, the United Nations Agency for Food and Agriculture, around 733 million people faced hunger in 2023. The numbers are also shocking with regard to malnutrition and high food prices all over the globe, even in continents with large food producers such as Latin America. What is CGIAR's view on the impacts of climate change and international conflict with regard to food security?
Gabriel, the number you said, it's definitely shocking. And definitely the two main causes for malnutrition and hunger are the two you mentioned, conflict and climate change. So conflict, I don't think I need to explain it. Everybody knows it very well. But on climate change, the impact of climate change on food security, it's huge. The way climate change is affecting food security is by impacting agricultural production. So we're producing less with the climate change. The disruption to the food distribution, so the value chain do not work when we have climate crisis and climate shocks. And they are making food less accessible and less affordable, particularly for the vulnerable population across the world. So definitely climate change is intensifying the global food insecurity problem. And the number you mentioned are very, very bad. If you look at them regionally, they are different. So we have, as you said, 757 million people that are hungry as of the data of 2023 by the report of FAO called SOFI. But 20% of them are in Africa, 8% of them are in Asia, 7% in Oceania, and luckily in Latin America and the Caribbean, we have only 6%. But if you look at the other component of hunger, which is malnutrition, there you find that the malnutrition is very bad, and we have about 2.8 billion people. So almost 36% of the global population that cannot afford a healthy diet. And it's very sad, most of the people that are affected are either vulnerable communities or kids. So when you look at the kids under 5, you find that 22% of the world kids are stunted, 7% are wasted, and 6% are overweighted. So the number is really bad. And all of this got much worse with COVID-19 that was compounded by a global crisis, plus climate change, plus the numerous conflicts across the globe.
Mm-hmm. Well, looking at these numbers, we can identify that one of the main focal points is to tackle food systems, agricultural food systems around the globe. CGIAR does excellent research upon exactly how to tackle these issues, making farmers produce with higher yields, and also be able to adjust food systems so that they become more sustainable and more practical. We're looking at a complex range of different types of transportation systems, as well as sales points, commercial points that impact and include these food systems. How does CGIAR view the current food systems? We can look at Latin America as well as other countries, and how to make them more sustainable, especially with regard to making food more accessible to these more vulnerable communities.
It's a big question, Gabriel. When we talk about sustainability and transformation of agri-food system, it's really, we are talking about the whole system. It's not only the production. It's not only the household. It's anything in between. It's before the production, so the input side, for example, it's the post-harvest, it's the transportation, it's the trading and the supermarkets and the market in general. So it's very, very complex. The system is very, very big and very large. So when we talk about transformation, we need first to know transform towards what? And that's what you said. It's sustainability, it's resilience, it's efficiency, and it's inclusiveness. Those 4 areas are very important when we talk about transformation. And all of this in a crisis, in a climate crisis mode. So we talk about climate change and the impact on food system. And before I move to the transformation in different parts of the world, I would like to say that when we say +2, +3, +4 degrees, the scary part is that only by adding +2 degrees, we will have about 189 million more people becoming hungry. When we say +4, that's gonna give us 1.8 billion more people hungry and malnourished. So it's very bad when we hear about the temperature. 1 degree might seem not that bad for most people, but actually 0.1 and 0.2 degrees affect productivity. So now let's talk about transformation. If we look at our agri-food system now, what they are using a lot of water. So we're using about 70% of water, and water is one of the limiting factors for us to produce more. We are emitting 33% of the greenhouse gas as a system, and we are also affecting negatively the biodiversity on the planet, and we are wasting about 34% of our food either as waste or as a loss. The loss is at the production system and the waste is at household system. So what we are doing, it's really working on different aspects. The aspect of adaptation to climate change, going in the scenarios of the future, the +1.5, the +2, and so on and so forth. So what we need to do, we need to genetically improve crops and animals and fish that can take more temperature. When you have more temperature, there is a huge sensitivity at the floral stage for most crops, for example, but there is also, you need more water to produce the same. So it's a really very tricky in plant production, for example, the same thing with animals, the same thing with fish. So that's one aspect. The other aspect we look at is really how do we make the value chain more efficient? The value chain is very, very long. And that length of the agri-food system make it not very efficient. So what we are looking at, how could we make the farmers very close to the market? How could we make that value chain that is this big, this one? So, and there, what you need to do is really understand the market and understand the connection between the farmers and the market, but also use infrastructure, use technology to make the life shelf of product much longer. There is very much need for infrastructure at the rural area, particularly cold stores, for example, are very important. And we are looking how do we use renewable energy, for example, at the rural area to help farmers maintain the freshness of their produce to have a high price in the market. The other area we are looking at as well, it's policies and regulation that will help the farmers and help the country to transform their agri-food system. So you need to align the incentives for sustainability and for resilience. You need to create the market for example, the neglected and underutilized species to create that diversification. You need to put the right policies to make sure you are not overusing fertilizer or not using enough fertilizers, or to adjust the price of the produce or of the input to make sure that the farmers adopt technologies and innovation that will allow them to produce more with less. And there is, of course, in the inclusiveness, it's a big subject. You need to bring women and provide them really with access to the resources. You need to bring back the youth to agriculture, because without youth, this agriculture is going to stop. So we need really youth to come, and the technology could be an attracted component to the youth to come back to agriculture. And we need, in total, a modernization of the agri-food system as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Dr. Elouafi, I think you've been able to outline exactly what are the big challenges that we have. Now we're going to go to a short break. When we come back, I'd like to get into the details of some of these aspects. Para você que vem nos acompanhando, fique por aí que o Agro América volta em instantes. Vamos entrar nos detalhes dos desafios que hoje o mundo enfrenta no ramo da agricultura. Fique por aí. Olá, o Agro América está de volta agora, começando o segundo bloco deste programa. Hoje eu estou entrevistando a diretora de uma das maiores redes de pesquisa em agricultura do mundo, a senhora doutora Ismahane Elouafi, que fala conosco direto de Dubai hoje, mas realmente uma pessoa que tem um currículo importantíssimo no que diz respeito à pesquisa agropecuária. Dr. Elouafi, welcome again. I'd like to start out with a study conducted by FAO, as well as with the Economic Commission for Latin America and Caribbean, CELAC, the World Food Programme, and ICA, in which they identified that the expense of inaction in the face of hunger and food insecurity averages around 6.4% of the gross domestic product across the studied nations. Do you believe that such numbers are enough to make nations look at public policy for agriculture in a more serious manner, given the fact that we don't have much time in order to act upon climate mitigation?
I think yes. I think the numbers are strong and clear, and they will attract, hopefully, the attention of policymakers and of other stakeholders. I think really the cost of inaction, it's going expensive by the day. So climate change is a reality that's going to just worsen with the time. So what we cannot address today, we won't be able to address in a month or in a year or in 10 years. So definitely there is a need to align the incentives. If we want to have a real transformation, the policy has to back up that transformation. And that's where really the importance of public policy is tremendous. And I think the only people that understand it very well is the private sector. The private sector has been lobbying our public policies for a very long time. But the consumers, the farmers, they don't have really a collective voice, and they have not been able to lobby the public policy to really align it with what is needed from the farmer perspective and from the consumer perspective. And I think really 6.4 of GDP, it's really high. And as we said, that numbers go up very quickly. There is another study that was done by an institute in Germany called ZDF, by Professor Joachim van Braun. And what it shows that just 2 years ago, the UN Food Systems Summit, at that time, there was a new paper saying that if we want to stop the hunger, and particularly hunger, by 2030 at that time, we need $12 billion. Right now, the new numbers says we need double of that number. So the more we wait, the more it's going to be costly really to address the issues of malnutrition and poverty and degradation of nature. And that's where we need the right policies right now.
Well, reducing carbon emissions from agriculture in the Americas, for example, given the fact that different types of agriculture have distinct impacts on carbon emissions, are important to be addressed as well. And this goes into technology as well, as you said in the first block, looking at modifications of plants, looking at the development of infrastructure in the Americas or in the other continents in a way that it's more efficient as well as it's cost effective, but also time effective. Given the fact that there are so many challenges, what can be reviewed and adapted in order to reduce these carbon emissions with a few examples? Let's say looking at as well at the fact that agriculture needs to look at biodiversity in a different manner, as well as not expand its land use as well as its water use. So there are different levels of analyses that need to be made in order to look at what is we call sustainability, which is a small word for such a large and diverse issue to be tackled. So going back to the question is looking at what are the few distinct points you could say that need to be tackled in public policy as well as in the use of technology in order to advance, let's say in the short term, the sustainability factor of agriculture.
Absolutely. Like if I want to take the example of methane. So methane comes mostly from livestock. We have about 30% of the methane coming from livestock and from rice. So there are a lot of technologies right now to reduce methane very easily by 50%. So on the livestock side, there is the genetic component. So there are certain genes that allows the cows to have a much more effective digestive system. So working both on the genes of the cow, but also the microbiome in the guts of the cow and the forages. So we have a very, very innovative work that is funded by Bezos Earth Fund with our center, the Alliance SIAT in Colombia, and our International Livestock Research Institute Center in Kenya. And with that, what we did, we selected from the forages. We have about 76,000 accessions of forages in our gene bank in Colombia. We took all of them and we find species that not only lower methane, but also lower NO2. And this is also very, very bad gas that we are trying to reduce the emission from the ag system. On the rice, for example, there is a technology called the alternative wetting and drying instead of paddy field that reduce very easily by up to 70% the methane from the rice. So there are different technologies. Some of them have to do with either digestive systems, by plant, the animals, or the mechanic, how we are doing our agriculture. So what we need to do is invest more in technologies, but also adopt them and scale them up at the farmer level. And I hope with that, we will attract more youth to agriculture because we do need also to have a transition. Most of the people in the farming system right now, be it in Latin America, be it in North America, be it in Europe or in Asia or Africa, are very old people. So we need to attract back youth to agriculture, and with technology, we could make the combination that will allow you to come back to the ag systems.
Now, to make agriculture more accessible to youth, we have a technology factor. There's also a factor on how these producers can also increase their yield and also their sales, right? I mean, I've interviewed many agricultural producers here in different countries in Latin America, from Dominican Republic to Colombia, that look at the biggest problem is the traditional look of agriculture and the technology that can be implemented today. So part of the communication and part of science is also making these technologies accessible and known to these producers. What do you think is the homework that nations need to do in order to distribute this knowledge and maybe invest more in international cooperation with CGIAR, with institutions like ICA, in order to make this understanding, this knowledge accessible and also feasible for these young agriculture producers and also for the women in different rural areas in the world?
You said the word, Gabriel. It's about really accessibility to the knowledge and about partnership. So partnership is very important. We need really, it's not time for each nation or each group to be by themselves. It's time for us to come together. And I think institutions that you mentioned, be it ICA, be it SIGA, be it, for example, FAO, the UN organization, the groups, the group of NGOs, of consumers, the group of farmers need really to work better together. And I think really the partnership and the accessibility to resources, because many of the youth want to be really the right profile to have certain access to finance. So if we want our youth to come back, not only we need to make them aware of all the possibilities from technologies and innovation, but we need also to facilitate the finance to them, particularly to women, as we said, and access to resources, the land, the water, the input. So all of this has to come together in a way that really facilitates the adoption of technologies, the coming back to agriculture. I think other sectors, it's much easier because it's somehow simpler. And maybe it's more attractive because it's easier to understand. Whereas in agriculture, it's a complex system. So if you talk about livestock, it's different than poultry. It's different than producing maize versus beans versus other crops. So it's very important to really to have a right programs at the national system. And it's very important to work with the national organizations. We do work with INBRAPA very much, but so do we with Mexico, with many countries in Latin America. So it's very important that the national systems are the right vehicle for extension and for reaching out to youth, reaching out to women, and helping them with the knowledge and the finance, in addition to global institutions, of course.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, I think one of the key points that you mentioned is also the fact that the more we wait, the more the cost of transition becomes higher, as well as certain things such as being able to give farmers, the insurance that they look for in the field for small, for medium, large sized farmers, to have this insurance, which is essential for their work, but at the same time, it becomes further more complicated in order to address these issues and address the financing for agriculture at the same time as the world is looking for financing energy transition, decarbonization in all nations, in forms like the G20, in forms like COP29, which will be held this year in Azerbaijan, a country that is becoming a hub for exportation of gas and petrol and other things, in which the discussion of other sectors becomes more important as well, but also agriculture also needs to be given the highlight. To finish up our program, I'd like to know more about CGIAR and ICA's recently decided to work closer together to transform agri-food systems in the continent. What are CGIAR's goals and expectations for this partnership?
So we are really very delighted to really deepen our relationship with ICA. And let me start by telling you how important is Latin America and the Caribbean in the global food production and global food security, and particularly in biodiversity. So Latin America and the Caribbean are home for 6 of the world's 10 most important biodiverse countries and landscapes. We have COP16 happening in Cali in Colombia very soon. So Latin America and the Caribbean has 30% of the global biodiversity, 30% of the planet renewable water resources, and 46% of the tropical forest. So it's a very interesting part of the world where we see that there is a wealth of biodiversity that is at risk. And that's where at risk because of the climate change as well. And that's where it's very important for us to work with ICA and work with the national system to look at how do we transition the agri-food system that are quite strong in Latin America towards, in this climate crisis, towards sustainability, toward resilience, toward inclusiveness and efficiency. And that's where really the relationship with ICA, because we complement each other very well. We are a research for development institution. We work in most of the countries, and by the way, we have 4 of our centers that are in the Americas. So we have CIMMYT, which is the International Center for Wheat and Maize in Mexico. We have our International Potato Center, CIP, in Peru. And we have the Alliance CIAT in Cali, which is on tropical agriculture. So these centers, and we have one center on food policy in Washington, US. So these centers really, and the work with the nurses and the work with ICA will allow us really to bring technologies and scale them up at the national level, at the subnational level. And that's where collaboration, it's not only between us and ICA and the national system in Latin America, but also with the IFIs, the International Financial Institution, as the Inter-America Development Bank, the World Bank, the IFAD, and so on and so on, the Caribbean Development Bank and other IFIs. Because if we talk about scaling up, we talk about big numbers, and we talk about working with the SMEs that you mentioned, but also with the private sector at different stages and at different sizes.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Ismahane Elouafi, Director of CGIAR, the largest network of research on agriculture in the world, publicly financed. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to hear you and to understand more about the mission CGIAR has in the world and what we can do more to make agriculture more sustainable.
Thank you very much. Pleasure, Gabriel. And I hope really that we will continue our very strategic partnership with ICA and strategic work in Latin America and the Caribs. Thank you.
Bom, o papel da ciência é fundamental para o desenvolvimento da agricultura. Espero que este programa tenha sido informativo e eu convido você e todos os telespectadores para acompanharem este e outros programas do canal AgroMais no nosso canal no YouTube, @AgroMaisTV. Até a próxima!